Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back into Lightroom with me, Stefan. Today, I want to talk about editing more selectively and controlling lights and shadows and some effects in your image with a little bit more control than we have talked about previously with more global adjustments. So global adjustments being things that really affect our entire image, like our contrast, exposure, all of these things, our white balance, and to a lesser extent our hue, saturation, and color, which although they affect certain colors really only, still affect our entire image overall. So sort of in line with this week's module, Light as Subject, I want to show you guys some tools and methods in Lightroom that we can utilize to really accentuate lighting effects in our image, because oftentimes successful photographs aesthetically use lights, whether obviously or not, to really accentuate or support the idea, theme, subject, the content of the image, right? That's all. The whole point of photography, after all, is to use light to capture something or illustrate something. So up to this point, we've done a lot of global editing. And so today we're going to go into more detail about how to adjust our image in certain areas. But before we do that, I want to answer some questions. Real quick, a lot of you guys are getting really into the editing, and I had a student ask me, can I make a copy of an image so that I can edit it two different ways? And the answer is yes, kind of. Instead of copying the actual DNG file, since Lightroom is only referencing that image, what we can do is create a virtual copy, so another set of edits that we can visualize over top of the image. So really, it looks like we've made a real copy of the image, but it's really just a virtual copy. So the easy way to do that is to right-click on an image that you want to copy and go to here and create virtual copy right there. And then once you do that, it'll appear next to it and it'll have 1 of 2 and 2 of 2 as you hover over it. Okay. Now, this isn't creating another DNG in your DNG originals folder in your backup, so you won't have them exported or saved somewhere outside of your Lightroom catalog. You would have to export them in order to do that. Right now, these are just 2 versions of the same one image. Okay. So that's really helpful to have if you want to compare 2 different ways of editing that. Here I have this highly edited color image, and then of course a lesser edited grayscale image cropped differently. So before we get started, there's a couple things that I want to talk about in terms of more control of global edits really quick. First of all, if you do have an image that you've done all this editing to and you want to maybe undo it all, you got into an editing hole and you've done all this stuff, you can see all these edits that you've done. Oh, I don't want to go through and add zeros to all these to go back to how it was originally. No problem. Right here you can just click reset. Takes it back to what it looked like originally. So here is my image as it came out of my camera, and raw files are meant to be sort of flat and neutral because it's all of the data that your camera sees, and then of course your job is to come in here and sort of push and pull it a little bit. So now that I've reset it, if I decide, oh no, I didn't want to do that, I can just click undo right here, Command Z, Control Z, whatever, bring it back. But at this point, there are some things that I want to talk about before we get into all the fun little detailed brushes and whatnot. A couple little things that I want to mention in terms of editing your image to be sort of clean and finalized. So if I reset my image, and we're going to build this image back up to how it really is now, but let's start over. I'm going to reset my image, and here we go. Some of you guys have turned in images that are a little underexposed, maybe a little crooked, and so I really want you guys to start cleaning up your images, really thinking about presenting final, tailored, polished photographs, right? And that's what this whole process is, it's polishing. Right? So remember, try to take a good photograph in the beginning in your camera as much as you can and use this stuff to polish. Don't use this stuff to save bad photos. Right? Or as my photo teacher used to say, you can't polish a turd. Anyway, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this image because I got a lot of negative space, I was kind of far away, and the easiest way to adjust a crooked image is just with the crop. Right? right? I can bring my crop in a little bit, and I can start to rotate it by hovering over here and adjusting my crop like this. Lining up lines in the image, placing things where I want to. This grid's really nice because I can highlight my rule of third points, my 3 sections in my image. Really helps me crop where I want to crop. I don't like the negative space being bigger on this side, so I'm going to go back to my crop tool again, and I'm going to change my aspect ratio. That's the ratio between the height and the length of the image crop. So I'm going to go to 4:5, 8:10. It's closer to square. I like that a little bit more. It's more my style. Okay. And if you click the R tool on the keyboard in Lightroom, it opens up the crop tool, by the way. Shortcuts. Saves time in your life. Okay, not bad. I'll live with that crop. But we can still see that there are some kind of curves happening in these lines a little bit, just slightly. And you can see these lines are kind of tilted back in the image a little bit because I was low to the ground. So the top of this building kind of seems further away, right? And I really wish that these lines were straight and even and not kind of slanted. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go into my lens correction tool. That's this drop down over here. Lens correction basically is a way of correcting for the curvature in your image that is resulting from the curvature of your lens glass, right? Your lens is curved, so it creates some distortion sometimes. Lightroom has a smart profile system that recognizes most modern lenses. So if I go to Profile under Lens Correction, and I hit Enable Profile Corrections, it automatically knows what lens I used because it's recorded in the metadata, the data inside my photo file from my camera. So most modern lenses have profiles made for them already. All of your kit lenses will. Unless you're using an older film lens or something, it will probably have a profile immediately show up. Okay? And you can always go and search for one or even make one if you need. So it's already adjusted my image. It's adjusted for the curvature of my lens glass, and it's adjusted the vignetting that happens from the edges of my lens, which are sort of dark on the inside, and the light travels easier through the center of the lens glass than the edges because of the curvature, and so it gets dark around the edges. So when I turn my profile on, it adjusts for that vignetting, and it adjusts for that curvature of the glass. Okay. Chromatic aberration is something that happens when there's sort of a color hue around the edges of objects that are backlit. I'm not going to have a lot of it in here, but you can see there's this kind of little like weird outline on the roof. If I click on this, maybe it'll help it a little bit. Yeah, it took it away a little bit. So that happens sometimes, especially in digital images where you have something that's kind of backlit or really bright back here, and that light is kind of curving around, and its sensor sort of is trying to, make sense of the data in this color and tone versus the intensity of this color and tone. So that takes it away. If something is really strongly backlit, that'll help you. So I just always turn them both on just to clean up my image. And of course, you can control all this manually too. Here you have your vignetting, you have your distortion. Sometimes with really wide angle shots, you still might need some distortion control manually even after your profile. So your profile's on, you can adjust further if need be. And as a creative tool too, if you wanted to bloat something a little bit, you could always use that. But I'm going to leave mine to 0. And here's your chromatic aberration, your distortion of color edges. You can control here, and your vignetting here. Again, I'm going to leave mine at 0. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of global adjustments is your transform tools. Transform is a way of thinking about your image as a flat plane, like a piece of paper or a book or something, and you can adjust it in the same way that you would if you tilted that book or piece of paper. This is really helpful when you have undesired perspective distortions, like I was really low to the ground when I took this photograph, so the things at the top of the image look further away from me. And especially in the case of having geometric shapes like a building or a wall or patterns of lines like we do here, the top of the image very obviously appears to be distorted as it gets away from me. So anyone that's taken perspective drawing, this is probably no surprise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust that vertical plane a little bit so that those lines at the top and the bottom appear perpendicular to my horizontal plane and parallel to the sides of my image. So that's pretty close. My horizontal plane does the same thing, so I can use that to adjust. Oftentimes, though, you actually want to rotate your image and get a center line straight first. That way, you really are making sure that it's the rotation that needs to be adjusted before these, because these really affect the sort of edge proximities of any geometry. So I try to get some kind of center point rotated right first. So I'm using my lines in here. It's pretty close. This little grid shows up whenever you're hovering over these tools, which really helps. And if you want to not see that, you can just hover over here. Okay, so that's pretty close, maybe right there. And then I'm going to adjust my horizontal plane so that my ceiling, my roof here is pretty even, my sidewalk is pretty even. Although sometimes things in the real world actually aren't even, right? Things aren't always perfect in the real world. So you've got to be careful to keep that in mind and always visualize it without the grid and just eyeball it and see what works. So my vertical needs to actually come back a little bit because that was too much. Okay. Okay, that looks pretty good. Not perfect, but close enough. Much better than it was. Because again, if I reset my image, whoa, big difference. So already, that's way cleaner like that than it was when I shot it, right? It was a quick shoot from the hip to capture this moment, and then now I'm gonna clean it up. Much better. Okay, so we're gonna stop there in terms of global adjustments. I think that's really it. But one thing I'm gonna do really quick before I get into some of our selective editing tools is I'm just gonna make some basic corrections on this. So it's a little bit dark. I'm gonna bring my exposure up a little bit. I'm still gonna leave it a little bit dark in here because of what I'm gonna do shortly. But I am gonna bump everything. And I usually do bump something one way or another, almost always a little bit, because raw images are intended to be flat. The data is just the raw data that your image, that your camera caught when you photographed it. So it's always a good idea to come in and just give it a little polish, a little once over. Come down here to my hue, saturation, and color, and I'm going to bump my luminance of my oranges and yellows a little bit, my reds for her skin tone, and I'm going to change my yellow wall to be a little bit more orange. I like that, a little bit warmer, and my red a little bit oranger so that she doesn't look so sunburned. There we go. Okay, still a little dark down here, still a little overexposed up here, and we're going to correct for that, okay? So now that I've got that to a pretty good spot, right, I've adjusted everything a little bit here, I want to go into this image and work it a little bit more. And for me, the vision of this image is really to have these two darker focal points connect sort of with the eye across this really graphic backdrop. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to try to reshape some of the light in this image, balance out my overexposure here with my underexposure down here, and then create sort of a lit focal line between these two dark spots to create that nice diagonal angle for our eyes to follow from the left to the right through the image across this really interesting backdrop. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some adjustment tools that I can control where in my image things get adjusted. So a lot of those tools are found up here. And some of you might have touched these already, but I'm going to go through them anyway. The first thing I'm going to talk about is this adjustment brush over here. All right, we already know the crop tool, so I'm going to talk about our adjustment brush. Okay. Now, if we click the adjustment brush works just in the same way that actually our basic editing tools do. All the sliders, all our texture and density edits, everything is the same, except with the added benefit of being able to apply it with a brush. We have two brush options, so we can set different settings for an A brush and a B brush. I'm just going to do one. And here, we can change the size of our brush. We can also change the size of our brush with our keyboard using our bracket keys. So left bracket smaller, right bracket larger. I can change the feather of that brush, so how sharp or hard of an edge that brush has. I like to keep my feather pretty high though. And the flow, right? How effective that brush is, right? I think of it as like how much ink or how much exposure, how much contrast is being applied overall. So I like to sort of just leave that at 100 and then adjust the power with these things up here, okay? And you have a density slider too. I encourage you to play with all of these, But I'm just going to leave most of these at 100, except for my feather. Well, actually, let's bring that up to 100 too. And then the size I'll adjust as I need. Okay? I'm going to have kind of a smaller brush though, just so you can see. Okay? Up here, above the brush settings, you have all of the same kinds of sliders that are found in your basic global adjustment editing sliders, right? All this is the same, except when I click on my image and I click and hold, I can paint in that edit, right? Anywhere I want. Now that's ridiculous right now. This is crazy. It's way too much. But the cool thing is that once I click and drag and paint that in, I have a dot now that's been generated. And I can move that dot around. And I can delete that and redo it, right? That dot is an active dot, and it's you know it's an active dot because it's double dotted. It's a light dot with a dark dot, and it looks like an eye. Right? If I click and make a second one, right, that just is still part of that dot. Okay, so now I've done it in those two different places. But what if I want to make a new dot with different adjustments? I can go up here and go to New. It puts that dot down. Now it's a flat gray, right? And I can make a new adjustment. Right? And that one can be different from my other one. Right? Now this is just crazy what I'm doing right now on the image, but it's just an easy way for you to see what I've done. Now that I have two dots, the one that's active, the one that changes when I change my sliders is my active dot, so it's the double dotted one that I can move around. Okay? Now down here on the left, it says Show Edit Pins Auto, Always, Selected, and Never. I choose Auto. Auto means that when I'm in here working, right, it shows my pins. Click Done. Right? When you click Done, they go away. None of those options are available, and now I'm stuck with these edits, right? But if I go back to my brush tool, it shows the dots again when I hover over my image. Right? So anytime you do any of these edits in selective areas, once you click Done, they're there, but the dots you can't see. But if you ever want to change anything, you can just go back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these dots because these are ridiculous. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of paint in a little bit of exposure over here where my subject is walking. Okay, just ever so slightly. Okay, now that's obviously a lot. It looks really fake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down, bring my contrast down a little bit. I can keep my highlights up there, I kind of like that. My shadows up a little bit. Get my whites down because that's really making it really bright. My blacks up. Not too much though, because again, it starts to look really strange if you go too much, if you go too far. So really keep in mind that as you're using these spot edits that you really compare to the rest of the image and how forced it looks and how okay with that you are. So there we go, that's not too bad. It kind of looks like there's a little reflective light happening. It's not too crazy. And again, I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to click Done. Okay, that's not too bad. Now what I'm going to do is instead of using a brush, right, and again, you can add as many brush points as you want and edit them all different from each other. It really just depends. So if I wanted to add another one here, I could. Click Command-Z to undo that. But once I click Done, it applies those brush strokes and hides them. Okay. The next tool I want to talk about is a radial brush, or a radial tool. The radial tool works kind of like a brush, except for what you're doing is you're creating a circle or an ellipse, and the edit is either happening on the outside or the inside of that circle, depending on how you set this. Okay, and then it goes from an area of 100% down to 0, or vice versa. So right now, all of my edits are really bright. And again, when I click on the radial tool, right, it gives me a drop down. Here's all my edits for that radial tool. And then here's how I control the sort of intensity of that feather. Right? No feather means a hard edge. Lots of feather means a soft edge. I would encourage you guys to have soft edges. Okay? Right now, the edit is happening on the outside of my radial tool. So I want it on the inside. So I'm going to click here where it says invert, and that's underneath all of my selective edits here. Down here it says feather and it says invert. So now if I click invert, the actual effect is happening inside of the circle, and it gets softer and softer as we go out. Now, the great thing about this radial tool is I can consistently change the size, the scale, the shape of that ellipse. I can rotate it if I hover over one of these points. I can rotate the angle of that ellipse. I can click this little dot and move it. Again, just like my brush tool, there's an active dot. I can go up here and click done and create a new one if I need to. If I scroll up to the top here, I can go new. So I can always come in and change this, edit this, make as many as I need, make one light, one dark, whatever. The luxury of this, unlike the brush, is that the effect smoothly goes from 100% to 0 on the outside. So you can see here, right, it's a smooth ellipse, right, almost like a spot of sun. So what I'm going to do now actually is I'm actually going to use this, and I'm going to make it a long, long oval. And I'm going to use this long oval to connect this sort of bright spot where my subject is that I created with my brush, and this dark spot of this tree at top left. And I'm sort of imagining that like a beam of sunlight is coming through the trees and hitting this wall, guiding my eye to my subject. Create a little bit of overlap here. And again, I have my feather set really high so there's not a hard edge, it doesn't look fake, right? And I'm not overdoing it, right? I don't want it to be too bright. Just a little pop, okay? And I'm making sure that I'm not bringing my darks up too high, because otherwise it looks like the shadows are being blown out and that kind of looks unnatural. So I'm trying to make sure that I zoom in, and I'm really just trying to, I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't look too crazy. Like right now, that's way too crazy. Okay. So that's better. Okay. Now, again, all of these things that you do with your basic edits globally right here, you can do with any of these tools, right? So if I wanted to make this have a blue cast, I could, right? If I wanted to desaturate an area and take the color out of it, I could, right? I don't want to right here, but I could. So this is a really nice way to adjust even the sharpness of certain areas, the haze and clarity of certain areas, along with your brightness and darkness density edits that you have here. So again, you got a lot of leverage, you got a lot of leeway here to really play. I'm going to actually desaturate this just a tad, because as you make things brighter with exposure and contrast, things actually do get more saturated. And also, I don't like how warm it is. It's a little bit too much sunlight, so it's too hot. So I'm going to bring it down just a little bit less yellow temperature-wise. I'm going to bring my highlights up a little bit. Let's go over here. Lights up a little bit. Too much. Okay, that's not too bad. I'm going to open it up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to click done. Okay, now there's this kind of light beam going across. It's like not super apparent, but it's there. And it almost looks like it's swiping across this wall. I got some darker areas on either side. Again, not too heavy-handed, not trying to make it look super obvious. Just kind of looks like there's a splash of light going on. Okay, so I've used my radial tool to make this long ellipse, and I've used my brush tool to sort of paint in this area, right? I could even go back to my brush tool and create a small brush and come in and really get specific if I wanted to. Right? Getting my husky in the shot a little bit of a pop. Or if I wanted to pop this out a little bit, really brighten everyone just a tad. So it looks like that sunlight's really affecting them. Now let's say you accidentally have too much like this. Well, that doesn't look natural. What am I going to do? Delete and start over? Not necessarily. You can go down here to erase. Once you click erase, you have a brush still, but it's got a minus in the middle of it, right here. And then when you click, you can erase the area that you don't need. Right? And you can adjust the brush of the erase tool just the same as you can with your adding brushes. You just go in and erase. Right? So It's kind of like painting or drawing with light a little bit. Again, you want to do this in moderation. You don't want to get too crazy. Okay. Okay. Sometimes I don't like to show this to new Lightroom users because they just go ham. Okay. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of these selective edits, your computer needs a second, Lightroom might need a second, so I'm going to click done. Okay, not bad. I'm going to zoom back out. Oh, that looks great. Her face though, not great. It's very obvious. So I'm going to go back to my brush. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to go to that dot. Okay, if I hover over that dot, right, and click it, and if I hover over it long enough, it'll show me in red the areas that it's affecting. So if I just let go and hover over it, after 2 seconds, it'll highlight red the areas that are being affected so that you know where that brush, where it's happening in the image, okay? That's just an overlay to help you see it. I'm gonna click erase, and I'm gonna undo in there. Too much. Done. Let's zoom out. Great. So I've done some brush editing down here. I've got a radial filter going across here. I'm already digging that. But still, I got some things that maybe I want to work on. All right, up here's a little bright. Maybe there's some detail in that sky. Maybe I want there to be more shadow down here to really accentuate this area. So the next thing I'm going to do is use my radial tool, or not my radial tool, my graduated filter tool, which is this rectangle here. It works just like the radial filter tool, except for it works in a pull-out fashion instead of a radius or a circle or an ellipse. It goes from one side to a side of 0. So we have 100% on this side, 0 on this side, and a center point that I can use to drag it around. So essentially this side of my image is getting all of this edit, and the other side is getting none. I can adjust the width of that gradient, that graduated application of edit. I can hover around this dot and rotate it. So if I hover my mouse here, I can click and pull, which is what I'm going to do right now, to be about 45 degrees from bottom left, like that. I'm going to drag it down here, and I'm going to make it really, really big. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make it darker. I don't want it to be light. I actually want it to look like there's sort of shadow down here, and this person's walking into the light. So take this like so. And also accentuating that line, right? Because this darkness is sort of hugging it. Again, I'm not going to make it too crazy. I'm going to reduce the highlights, reduce the whites. Now it really looks like it's kind of dark over here. I'm going to actually create a second one. I'm just going to click and drag again, and now there's 2. Just like the other tools, we have dots. Our active dot is double dotted, so we can be adjusting that live. And then we can go click on the other dot. Right? And now we can be adjusting that one. Okay, so just keep track of your dots. Again, if you show your pins always, they'll always be visible when you have the tool open. If you show them never, then they're never visible, which is super aggravating, and that's just a nice way to see them if you want, or not see them if you want. I have auto set almost all the time, so that when I'm hovering in my image, they show up, and when I'm not, they go away. Just a nice way for me to see them when I'm working, and then there's my image without the dots, and I can see the effect really nice. Okay. So this top one that I've done is to sort of get this sky to not be as bright. Also, it's kind of gray. I want to make it a little bit blue. So I'm going to actually adjust that pin so that its white balance is a little bit more cool, a little bit bluer. That way, it appears more sky-like. Okay. You can actually adjust that here too. You can add a color if you want to. Like that. Get real crazy. Whoa. Kind of create like a filtered bleed effect, like an old film effect. Leave it in that kind of arena right there. I don't want too much. Maybe bring the saturation up a little bit. Okay. Not bad. And I'm just going to bring my highlights and whites down because it's kind of hot up there. I don't want it to be so bright. I want my light to be here. So now I have that filter is doing its job. I'm going to actually smoothen it out just a little bit. And again, you can see that you got to be careful because it's overlapping into my wall. So I want to be careful not to really do too much. Okay. But I think I like that. That's pretty good. So I'm going to click done. Okay. Already this image is looking so much more dynamic. The light's doing crazy stuff. I have this beautiful sort of ray of light coming through and guiding my eye across the image to my subject. And it just feels like enough to where, it's a finished image, but it doesn't feel too forced. Okay. Now, I'm pretty much done, I think. I really like where this image is at, except for a couple of things. And this is me being nitpicky, but it's an excuse for me to show you this next tool. And that's this trash down here, right? That's kind of beautiful, graphic, really nice textured wall. My dog and my subject, this woman walking here, and my leaves at the top left. It's a nicely framed image, but this trash is kind of distracting, right? I don't like that. So let's zoom in and take a look at this here trash. All right, well, luckily for us, we can get rid of that trash. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to demo you this last tool right here. It's a little circle with an arrow, and it is a clone/heal brush tool. What this tool does is it copies data from one area of your image over another area so that you can get rid of something like this piece of trash by taking some pixels from over here and putting them over here. So just like our brush tool before, we have, when we click on this, a couple of options. The size of our brush, first of all. Again, controllable with our bracket keys. Our feather, which is the hardness or softness of our brush edge. In this case, I'm not going to go to 100, but I'm going to leave it pretty high. I want it like 75. And you can play with it. Opacity is how see-through you want this to be. In this case, I want it to be 100% opaque because I don't want to see any more trash. Right? If I had it at like 50, wherever I copied from, you would still be able to see some trash through it, almost like a screen. So I'm going to make this opacity 100. Okay. Now you have two options for this effect. You have clone and you have heal. Clone, like the word sort of denotes, it's a direct copy, right? So I'm copying this information and putting it over here. So if I do that, I'm going to brush over my undesired subject. So it's this trash, or it could be a pimple or an exit sign, or maybe like a bird in the sky that you don't want, whatever. And as soon as you click and hold the mouse and brush over the area, and as soon as you let go, that area gets covered, and Lightroom tries to pick a spot that it thinks is a good copy spot. So this arrow shows you that from over here, Lightroom is copying that information in this direction to the place that you just painted over. Okay? Now, just like before, I can visualize my spots, or I can hide my spots, right? So I'm going to go to Auto. And when I move my cursor off the image, I can just quickly see how well it did. It did pretty good, right? But you want to be careful with clone because clone's a direct copy, which means if you have some weird pattern over here and you copied over here, it's going to be visible that you copied that pattern. So sometimes what I like to do is like to use the heal brush instead. Oops, getting hit up by old friends. So what I can do in this case is click heal. What heal does is it's a blending of these two areas, right? And sometimes what that does is it makes for a more smooth transition and it avoids direct copy of pixel patterns. So for me, I'm going to go with heal most of the time. Now sometimes with heal, especially if you're copying from one type of color to another, it doesn't work very well because it tries to blend dark, cool colors with maybe bright, warm colors. It doesn't do very well. So in that case, sometimes you have to combine clone and heal. But regardless, these pins are movable. You can delete them, you can edit them, you can redo them. And so if I move that over here a little bit, now I feel like maybe that'll do a better job. I'll give it a second to think about it. Does it do a better job? It's okay. Let me click done and take a look. Okay, not bad. Just looks like another scuff on the curve. Right, looks pretty natural. I wouldn't think anything of it. There's nothing really visible except maybe this little spot right here that looks like it's perfectly copied. And that's from my clone. But again, if I ever wanted to go back to my tool, I can just click it again, hover over my image, and see my spots, and I could always go click on them and edit where that spot is, where the source is, and so forth and so on. So again, always customizable, always undoable. That's the beauty of editing in RAW. But now there's no trash on the ground. If I zoom out, my image looks really clean and essential. And I could even go up here and get rid of this light up here, right? That actually is easier than you think it is, because this is a straight line, a series of straight lines. So if I go up here, go to my stamp tool, right, my clone, and I just take my brush, make it big, not too big. I'm going to bring my feather down a little bit. And I'm just going to paint over this. Okay, boom. And Lightroom's going to say, we want to take it from over here. Now it's a little bit off, right? So maybe what I can do is I can grab my source point, pull it down, and to see if I can make those lines line up perfectly. Did I do it? Too much. So again, it's kind of tough, but if you're careful, it really helps if your computer's really fast. Got a lot of pictures on this little laptop. Okay, that's not too bad. I could probably do better, but I'm just going to go ahead and click done. Okay. Zoom out. Now, I can see that. So what I would actually end up doing is going back in and editing that again. So I'll come here, go to this point, make it active, click, drag down just a hair, see if it does a better job. Let's see. Once you get into really selective cloning and brushing like this, sometimes actually Photoshop is a better solution. But it just depends. Okay, let's click done on that and see. I'm just going to hover actually over here and see how that looks. Not bad. That looks pretty good. Close enough. Good enough for government work, as they say. Okay, so I zoom out, and look, no more lights, no more trash. My clone and heel brush tools have done a good job. And my radial and graduated filters have really helped me accentuate some shadows in these corners and highlight along my wall. And my brush tool has really helped me pop out the dog and my female subject in the corner here. So all in all, I would say this one's pretty done. I like where the color's at, like the crop. All the lines are nice. So yeah, that's a finished image. And now I just go ahead and export that and throw it up on the MeWe. Okay, guys, that's it for sort of selective edits. Go ahead and play with that a bunch. Have a good time. Utilize them in this module for your exercises and for your assignment. But don't go crazy, right? The best kinds of edits are sort of hidden in this natural feeling of the images that you create. So really do a good job at playing with them, but ultimately don't overuse them and don't rely on them to save a really, really bad photograph. Instead, try to take a good photograph, plan out a good image, and then use these tools just to make it better. Okay? All right, guys. Please watch the videos and do the readings that I have in this module. I want you guys to complete 2 drafts of your long-term assignment in the next 2 weeks. So you're going to do a first set of images, and then you're going to reshoot and do a better set. And I hope that you can utilize some of these tools in those final photographs, right? So have fun. I hope these are tools that you will appreciate. All right. Talk to you later.